From each of our perspectives, we are the center of our own universe. And there's this thing is if you just were totally just seeing yourself from this cosmic perspective, you would lose your identity.
Welcome to the Rubin Report. I'm Dave Rubin, and before I do anything else, make sure that you're still subscribed to our channel and be sure to click the solid bell so that you actually get notified when we post new videos. All right. Now that that's out of the way, joining me on the Rubin Report today is a futurist, a geopolitical expert, and author of several books, including Hacking Darwin, Genetic Engineering, and the Future of Humanity. Jamie Metzl, welcome to the Rubin Report.
Thrilled to be here, Dave.
I am glad to have you here, sir, because I watched you on Joe Rogan, and I was like, I've got to talk to this guy about all of this crazy futuristic stuff.
It's crazy. Our world is changing, and it's going to change whether we like it or not, and better for people to understand what's happening and be part of the process of change rather than just sit back and let it happen to us.
All right, so I'm pretty sure we're going to have a dense hour of exactly that. But before we get into the new book and really the meat of all of this, how does one become a futurist?
You know, it's a funny question, or there's a funny answer. So for my whole life, I've really been thinking about, well, what's coming next? When I was in law school, there were a group of us who were thinking about what is the information technology revolution going to mean, and this is the very early days of the internet, then the World Wide Web, and we were writing about it, and so I have a lot of articles from those early days that were imagining the world that we exist in. Then more than 20 years ago, I started thinking and writing a lot about the genetics revolution. I never called myself a futurist. I was just a guy who was thinking about the future, and I was going around. I do a lot of speaking at various events, and there are all these people who were calling themselves futurists. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. How did they become futurists? So like I write about the future, I talk about the future.
Right, I assume they were wearing like sort of silver monochrome outfits.
Exactly, yeah, like in the Devo hat. And so one day I thought, you know, maybe I'm a futurist. And so I was being introduced, and it was when you're speaking, they say, hey, will you give us a short blurb about yourself? And I put, Jamie Metzl is a leading futurist. And then somebody gave this little card like that and said, Jamie Metzl is a leading futurist. And I became a leading futurist. I declared myself leading. I hope I can live it. So it's like one of these things where, like, I come from a family of doctors. Like, there's a day when you become a doctor. You kind of walk there, they give you the thing, you shake your hands, you take a picture. These are kind of self-declared titles. And so for me, I hope that every day I am being judged by the things that I'm writing and the things that I'm saying. All right, this guy says he's a futurist. Other people are saying that he's a futurist, even though they're reading words that he himself has written. Is he saying things that make sense? Is he inspiring us to think differently about the future?
I guess we'll find out in about 55 minutes from now. So
exactly.
Let's go back a little bit further, though, to sort of where that sparked within you, because my audience knows I'm a huge sci-fi guy. Yeah. There are so many of the things that I think about and I think believe to some extent that I've learned through stories of science fiction. As a sci-fi writer and as someone that is a futurist, or at least on your business card, what were some of the stories that excited you when you were a kid?
So it was just all of these stories. I mean, these stories of exploring space, exploring humans. I mean, we are, because of the way our brains function, we learn through stories. I mean, that's been probably the greatest mechanism for the success of our species, is our ability to transfer information to each other. And we do it through this medium of stories. So just from when I was a little kid, I was a voracious reader. I read all the things that normal kids read. I loved Narnia. I didn't realize it was a whole Christian thing until it was much later. But I just read everything, and I've always gravitated to the world of stories. And even in I have a big part of my life that's nonfiction, even in the national security world. Even then, it's about stories, because what is the Cold War? What is anything? It's a story that we tell ourselves, and then we organize around those stories.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated when people watch, see something, or listen to something that like just blows their mind and just puts them on a different track. And one of the things for me, 1997, I ate some pop brownies and I was going to see Air Force One with a bunch of friends, but it was sold out. So we ended up walking into a movie called Contact, which none of us had ever heard of. We had no idea what we were walking into, and I'm sure you've seen the movie Contact, and it was written, of course, by Carl Sagan.
Right.
And that opening scene, the panorama of the universe, and maybe it was the pop brownies, and I was just right time of life. I was 21, but my mind was blown, and from there, I read almost all, I think, of Carl Sagan's books, and it just opened my mind to that sort of thing. And that's sort of what you need in the world.
That's what you need. It's, you know, from a cosmic perspective, we are so small. I mean, there are so many solar systems and so many stars and so many galaxies. Just if you try to think from the perspective of the whole, and then you think we're just this one little tiny planet.
Pale blue dot.
Exactly. Revolving around one star, one sun. And but from each of our perspectives, we are the center of our own universe. And there's this thing is if you just were totally just seeing yourself from this cosmic perspective, you would lose your identity. But if we get so caught up in our own little thing and we're not able to see ourselves in this greater context, that also, I think, can be dangerous, or at least it can make us less than we otherwise could be. And that's the role of stories. I mean, stories help situate ourselves, within our communities, and within our world, and our world broadly defined.
Which part of what you do, between talking about geopolitics and dealing with the future stuff and, you know, writing sci-fi and all these things, which one sort of excites you the most? Or is it just
it's all of a piece, you know? So definitely my big passion in life is to translate big, scary, sometimes complex ideas into language that can be shared. And so when I write novels, I mean, that's the whole point of my novels, is to have people enter into a world, and that's what novelists do. But in the world, what I'd like is people enter into a world and maybe think a little bit differently about themselves, about what it means to be a human, about how we're interacting with our technology now with Hacking Darwin. I'm doing the same thing, is that there is all of this incredible complexity of the genetics revolution, and there's like really hard science that not everybody is able to dig into. But what I want to do is to take all of that and present it to people in ways that they can see themselves in the story. And once we see ourselves in a story, then we can be part of it. We can feel empowered to have conversations, to have opinions. Because I think that's this crazy thing of this moment, is that radical technology, whether it's AI or genetics or nanotechnology, quantum computing, I mean, they're going to change our lives in deep and fundamental ways. But people are scared of the science. And so there's this, in some ways, it's like a helplessness that these trends are coming and they're bigger. People feel that they're bigger than they are. And my message is not just that that's not the case, and that's a failure of the scientists. I mean, the scientists need to be translating the science so to bring other people along. But science isn't its own thing. It doesn't exist in some kind of imaginary objective realm. Science exists within the context of our societies. And if we don't recognize that dynamic interaction, which means that everybody has a role to play, then we are going to have really warped outcomes that are going to be bad for society, and they're also going to be bad for science.
All right, so then let's jump into some of those big, scary ideas, and let's just sort of do 101 on a couple things, because I think that's really what you're trying to do here in a lot of ways, is just take a wider group of people and get them to understand some of this stuff, so it isn't so big and scary. So let's just talk about the world of genetics in general right now. So when someone says genetics, for the person that has no idea what we're talking about, what are you talking about?
And that person is my ideal audience.
And I think that's most people, and they're sort of afraid to admit it. They hear things.
And you know, frankly, that was why I loved my interview with Joe Rogan. Actually, I think that's why Joe Rogan is so successful, in addition to being a great guy, because he's just very confident as a person, but he's just asking common sense questions that the average person probably would want to ask. But when the average person, quote unquote average person, whoever that is faced with someone who's a quote unquote expert, even a self-declared futurist like me, they're kind of afraid of asking just some basic questions. They, well, what if it's a bad question? And we all have that kind of insecurity. So genetics. So everybody I think understands that genes are part of the blueprint for life. And so to put it on a human level, your mother has an egg, your father has a sperm. When that sperm fertilizes the egg, you have a fertilized egg. It's the early stage embryo. It's one cell, an egg and a sperm that come together. And in that cell, there is a blueprint for everything that you will become. And so that blueprint is written in a code, and that code is your genome. And your genome is made up of genes. So it's the blueprint for life.
Let me pause you there for a second.
Yes.
So would you say at that moment then, once that coding is there, is that the beginning of what you would say is life? I mean, this is of course where ethicists and geneticists and scientists and religious people have to debate all these things.
Yes. So there's a political question which makes it very difficult for us it's very difficult to think about that question and just say, well, there's a scientific question and there's a political question. Because the whole thing is life. Like, is an egg cell alive? Yes. Are our cells alive? Yes. Is sperm alive? Yes. But it's not on their own. They're not able to replicate, which is one of the hallmarks of life. And so you could say that that is the kernel of life, because life exists on a continuum. It's one microscopic cell, but that cell, if it grows in the quote-unquote normal way, it will become life. So I think that, like, I would never say that the people who believe that life begins at conception are wrong. I mean, I think that it's because it's a judgment call, it's all on a continuum. I think that we can't say that. But what I would say is that there's a difference between a single fertilized egg, maybe it's a single fertilized egg in a woman, or maybe it's in a lab. Like, there's
we'll get to that.
Yeah, and there's a difference between that and, like, a baby who's actually born and a 20-year-old person. I mean, there are all the politics of that, but there's no doubt that a single fertilized egg is the beginning of life.
Okay, so we now live in a time when we can start manipulating these genes.
Right.
Talk to me about that. Crazy stuff.
No, that's the crazy moment that we are in now. So we have evolved for about 3.8 billion years. So life, most scientists believe, began from these thermal vents in the bottom of the ocean, this first spark of life. And so all of life on Earth is related. It comes from that same spark of life. And all of life, our cells, plants, everything else, uses the same building blocks because we have that same origin. And for almost 4 billion years, we've evolved by the Darwinian principles of random mutation. Random mutation means just we're all different, and that's really important, because if from when we were single cell organisms or anything, if everybody is the same, it may be good now, but if the environment changes and you're still the same, then you're going to die. And so this kind of diversity is really important. So it's random mutation and natural selection. Natural selection just means we are in these competitive environments, and some formulations do better than others. I mean, there are like 1 million podcasts. Yours does a lot better than others, and that is a form of natural selection. That there's a marketplace and a certain set of attributes, and if the world changes, like, maybe that we have no more electricity, and it's like, or maybe there's no voice, and the people doing pantomime, those are the best podcasters, because no one can hear anything.
So that's basically just the nature of reality, sort of, that as things change, we modify along the road to survive.
So the core principle is 3.8 billion years driven by random mutation and natural selection. And now we are recognizing for the first time, one, that all of biology, based on genetics, is a form of information technology. And like our traditional IT, it is increasingly readable, and that's what genome sequencing is, and writable and hackable. And hackable meaning that we now have these tools to edit the genome, kind of like word processing. We can eliminate genes, we can add genes, and so we are able to hack life. And so we are beginning, after 4 billion years, this phase of our lives and our evolution, where we, this one little group of essentially monkeys that climb down from the trees in Africa that we have the tools to recreate all of life on Earth. And it's this awesome power. And to quote Spider-Man, it comes with a tremendous responsibility.
Technically, that was Uncle Ben.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
I do it myself all the time.
That is important.
Okay, so we have this idea now that we can edit the genome, we can read it, we can edit it, and all of those things. So before I get to the sci-fi part of my brain, which is where all the scary stuff comes in, what are some of the good things that we can be doing?
I'm so glad you asked that, because I speak about this stuff all the time. And I could speak for an hour, 58 minutes, like, here are all these miraculous things, it's so exciting. And then for the last 2 minutes, there's just some potential downsides we need to be mindful of. And then it's like at the end, people say like, oh my God, I'm so depressed, we're all gonna die. So we should be incredibly excited about this revolution, because it's going to help us a ton. So the most immediate impact is going to be how it changes our experience of healthcare. Right now we live in a world of generalized healthcare based on population averages. So you go to a doctor and you get treated based on being a human. If you have a headache, maybe you get a Tylenol. But you find out if you're one of the people who dies from Tylenol by taking a Tylenol, because everything is based on the odds of most people will respond to a certain treatment. And the same is true for about 88% of cancer treatments. We're now moving to a world of precision medicine. And so precision medicine means that you're treated not just based on your being a human, but based on your being you. So any intervention is going to be based on your individual biology.
So they literally are going to be able to look at your genome, is that the right word?
Well, so there's the genome, so there'll be a set of information. So it'll be your personal history, your family history, your biometric information, other measurements, and your genetic information. But your genetic information will be the most significant foundation of your electronic health record, and that information will be provided mostly at birth. So we're all going to be sequenced, just like when a kid is born, they do a blood test with a heel prick. Everybody in the not distant future will have their whole genome sequenced, and that'll just be part of their electronic health record. And so the exciting thing is, one, everyone's going to get this personalized medicine, and it will be better medicine because it'll be tailored for all of our biology. But even more significant, we're going to have billions of people whose genetic and life information are in these massive data sets. And then we're going to be able to use big data analytics to increasingly unlock the secrets of genetic and information and systems biology, meaning that we have systems of systems inside of our biology. And what that is going to mean is we're going to have a lot of information, not just about why you may be sick now, but about how your life is likely to play out. From the moment of birth, you're going to know that I have a greater than average risk of this genetic disease, for example. And that's going to be very actionable, because if you're a woman and you know that you have, let's say, a 70% greater than average chance of getting breast cancer, you're going to want to start your screenings much earlier than somebody who doesn't have that predisposition. But we're also going to have a lot of information that it's not deterministic, but is probabilistically predictable about certain things that have nothing to do with health, like IQ, the genetic component of IQ, personality style. Maybe that we have a great potential to be a fantastic sprinter or mathematician. And we're going to have to think very, very differently about parenting and about life. And a lot of this stuff can be scary, but it's also exciting. Like, imagine, right now we have these terrible refugee camps all over the world, but we have Einsteins in every one of those camps. And we just don't know who they are. In Los Angeles, where we are now, I mean, there are these inner cities, and the crime of inner cities, I mean, there's all kinds of problems. But it's just like we're throwing human potential down the toilet. So people are worried about genetic profiling, and they should be worried. But what about all these people who we're throwing away? If we knew that some kid who's like growing up in terrible conditions, like, has this incredible potential, and who knows whether any potential will be realized, but to be like a genius musician or mathematician, we would at least think twice about not providing resources to help people realize their potential.
It's so interesting because as you're saying all this, and I can think of all of the roads that we can do good things that you just laid out there, and then there's this other part of me, and maybe that just is the sci-fi dystopian part where you think of all the ways that there could be evil manipulation and population control and eugenics and all of these things that seem wrong or just in the wrong hands could go, just completely haywire. But so do you view that sort of choice?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you view that as different than with any other technology now, or is this sort of unique?
It's not different in that every technology has their utopian and dystopian potential uses. What's unique here is that this technology is so powerful and it's coming at us so quickly that we don't have the same time that we've had to figure it out, like with steam. I mean, steam and electricity and even using gasoline. I mean, all these things, they were revolutionary. But we had a little bit of time to transition. And this is the problem, is that the science is moving so quickly that the transitions can't happen in the kind of methodical ways and as disruptive as they've been in the past, but that will be much more methodical than what's coming. And that's why there's a race. And so every one of these technologies, every good outcome has a parallel story that's a bad outcome. And so for me, I tend to be all in all net optimistic. But the technology itself is agnostic. And what's at play now is the question of what are the values that we are going to use to guide this technology. And I think that's the game, and that's what I'm trying to bring people into the conversation, to say that if you are worried about a potential dystopian outcome, how can we fight together to make sure that that doesn't happen? How can we bring people into the conversation to say, all right, well, here's what I want to see. I want to have these technologies used in ways that are making our communities stronger, that are enhancing human potential in positive ways. But to do it, we all need to have a voice. And to have a voice, we need to be educated.
Are there people that just focus on the speed portion of this? Because for some reason that really fascinates me, like this whole thing does. But this idea that people all over the globe now, because of the internet and all the other ways we're connected, can all be working on these things all at the same time, all be, sort of jumping in front of each other in faster and faster ways. And for all we know, there's all sorts of technologies happening in China now that we have no idea about. And I want to relate this also, of course, to the geopolitical part, which is some countries are going to have more restrictions on these technologies and some won't, and all of these things. So the speed part to me is just really fascinating.
It's an essential piece of the story. Just think about this, that 100 years ago, 500 years ago, there were the same distribution of geniuses that we have now. But if you're a genius 500 years ago, somewhere in Africa or somewhere in Asia, you're kind of on your own.
Right.
Ramanujan, this kind of genius mathematician in India, he had like one book. I mean, he from that one book, he kind of figured out this incredible system of math. But now, if you're a genius, most anywhere in the world, you have access to the global library. You don't have to, in the Bronze Age, the Copper Age, we had all these people all around the world who are having the same discoveries, basically in the same pattern, without being connected to each other at all. It was kind of a waste of energy. If one said, hey, copper, got it. I'm just sending out the email.
Right. So Thomas Edison figures something out, and some guy halfway across the world doesn't realize, 3 months ago that was done.
But what a waste of energy. So now nobody, we're all interconnected. So everybody, you don't start at the bottom of the mountain. You start kind of 2/3 of the way up the mountain. And you don't have to take a step that has been taken by somebody else. You don't have to solve a problem that has been taken, that has been solved by somebody else. And so with Beta Ranch, everybody in the world increasingly being brought into this process, we are unleashing this imaginative, creative tidal wave that I just think that people don't appreciate the significance of that. And that's why in this field of biotech and genetics, pretty much every day there's another paper that comes out that nobody notices. But if this same paper had come out 10 years ago, every one of these
world changer.
Everyone would have gotten the Nobel Prize.
Right.
There's a Nobel Prize, every single Nobel Prize worthy discovery in the context of 10 years ago, every single day.
Right. So okay. So I think most people understand the part that if we can map your genetics, that then we can watch out and know that you shouldn't take this medicine or you should stay away from this food or that sort of thing. So it's sort of a blueprint for sort of how you can live and how you can flourish most maximally.
Yeah. And to identify, so right now when you have a disease, you have a symptom, and you go to the doctor, and then the doctor tries to treat that symptom. But maybe this is a symptom, something that's been germinating in you for a decade. Maybe it's something that results from a genetic abnormality that you had since the moment when you were that single cell, that fertilized egg. And so it's going to change our model of healthcare, that from treatment of symptoms to prevention. So I think that's so doing all of those things, but in a way that's personalized for you, because I'm going to know I have a risk of this certain outcome. I don't want that outcome to happen. And so here are the things that I'm going to do from the beginning.
So that then gets us to the editing portion of this, right? So, okay, so now we know that you're predisposed to X, Y, and Z. Now we can start editing things, right? To make sure that you're not going to get certain diseases.
Yeah. So what you're talking about is editing that happens after you're born. And so there's a big distinction between these two kinds of editing. There's germline editing, which I know we'll talk about, which is editing to sex cells. And so that's primarily embryos, but also it works on sperm and eggs. And the reason why it's called germline is that's when you edit the sex cells, the sperm cells, the sperm, eggs, or embryo, then that gets passed on to future generations. But if I edit you or an adult not in the sex cells, then that's just for that person over the course of their life. And that's why it's less controversial. It's controversial, but it's less controversial. So there's a whole class of interventions called gene therapies that are used to do exactly that. And right now, for example, cancer is probably the best example. So there are a lot of people who have cancer. We have these natural antibodies that fight cancers. But sometimes people, their antibodies aren't working well enough, and sometimes they have a cancer that just is overpowering their antibodies. So there's a treatment called CAR T therapy, where you take out somebody's blood cells and you genetically engineer them to boost their natural cancer-fighting superpowers. Then you put those cells back into the person's body, and that person becomes a genetic superhero.
So this is sort of like platelet-rich therapy, right?
Well, yes. So PRP, yes. I mean, PRP is a much narrower, much less systemic intervention. So yes, but this is that kind of quote unquote on steroids. Yeah. And so we are going to be, and so there's a delivery issue. When the delivery is happening through blood, that makes it a little bit easier. But then we have all kinds of what are called specialized cells. So you stop when you're that single cell organism or single cell pre-implanted embryo. You can have the potential to become everything, but your cells differentiate over time, and that's why you can have skin cells and liver cells and heart cells. And so when we're doing these kinds of interventions for gene therapies, we're wanting to edit a specific kind of cell. Well, let's call it a heart cell or something like that. And so there need to be delivery mechanisms to do it. And so when it's blood, you can easily take it out and put it back. But now there's this whole other area of research of using basically retrofitted viruses, because viruses for billions of years have developed a machinery to kind of infiltrate our bodies and replicate. So we take advantage of that to deliver certain kinds of gene edits to specific parts of the body to treat specific types of problems. And that's not fully ready for prime time with humans. There are some very early clinical trials. A huge amount of work, though, is happening in this area.
I don't know if this is exactly the right point to mention this. So where does CRISPR fall into all of this?
So CRISPR is among the best forms of gene editing. So if you have the genome and you're making the changes to the genome, there needs to be a mechanism for doing that. And so there have been prior tools for gene editing that were much slower and more expensive than this tool of CRISPR, and it's called CRISPR-Cas9 is the most prominent, but there are many. So basically there are these repeating patterns in the genome, and with the CRISPR systems, they can identify, use a guide RNA to find a specific place on the genome. And then with the Cas9, it's a cutting enzyme. So you think that it's the double helix. You go to a place, and then you have this little knife, molecular scissors, and you cut out what you don't want. And then the genome will either reconnect with that missing piece gone, or you can introduce an additional piece of DNA designed to fit in that little space, and it'll be like, oh, we're missing a piece of this bridge. Oh, here it is, and the cell will just naturally put it there.
So I sense we're getting into one of those places where the average person is suddenly going, whoa, I'm losing it a little bit here. So to unwind this a little bit though, because I think we've got the right pieces here. That doing all of that then would allow people to be, again, inoculated from certain diseases, to be able to maximize health, and also for generations then after to be able to not have to deal with these things.
Let me make it very real and concrete. So I'm a member of the World Health Organization, has an international advisory committee on human genome editing, which we were created at the end of last year, 2018, after a Chinese scientist announced in November that the world's first gene-edited babies had been secretly born in China in October 2018. So these tools of using these CRISPR system to change, basically they edited these pre-implanted embryos of these two little girls. And what they did was went in and they basically disrupted this one gene, which is called CCR5. No one needs to remember CCR5, but just the genes just all have different names. And what the CCR5 gene, when it's disrupted, people have disrupted copies of CCR5, mostly Northern Europeans, have an increased resistance to HIV, because the HIV virus can't penetrate into the cell. And so this was way before people thought, and myself included, thought it was safe. It felt like human experimentation. But these kids were born, and so the world's first gene-edited babies are born. And people go straight from that, and it's a huge deal. I think it was highly unethical of this guy to do. And then they say, all right, well then the next step in people's mind is, it's like the the Build-A-Bear workshop. It's like, it's like, oh, I'll take one of these, one of these, one of these. And it's not going to be that. Biology is too complex for that, but we are increasingly going to have the capacity, and it's the very, very early days, but it's going to be more and more and more, to begin making a small number of gene edits to potential future humans, and that's a really big deal.
So what was the ethical conundrum there? Just because this is still too untested?
Yeah, so a few things. One, it was just way premature. I mean, a lot of people are doing experiments on animals like mice, but to do these experiments on real live humans, I mean, we know that to me, I feel like we have the Nuremberg conventions about what is and is not okay, and this felt experimental.
And we know for a fact that this has been done. This has been verified in other places, or could this possibly just be a situation where
if there's a 1% chance that this is a fraud. In my view, there's a 99% chance that it is not a fraud, and I know a lot of people. That I work with people who know this guy, He Jiankui is his name. So I think I'm entirely convinced that it's real. But it was unethical because it was premature, because it was totally untransparent, because the work was sloppy, because the parents didn't give their proper consent, and because the target was a wrong one, in the sense that these kids, the father had HIV, the mother didn't. But the kids would not have been born with HIV had this not happened. So he wasn't treating something that they had, he was trying to give them an enhancement.
Wait, how do we know that they wouldn't have been born with HIV? Is that just not how it transmits?
So we have all kinds of technologies like washing sperm that make it so that if you are a man with HIV in the United States and you want to have a baby with a woman who doesn't have HIV, there are lots and lots of ways that you will have a baby if you get proper care that doesn't have HIV. So it's not like these kids were going to have HIV, they weren't. And so one is, although there's not a clear line between therapy and enhancement, this was clearly an enhancement. And my thought is we will be enhancing ourselves in the future, and probably in the future we should be enhancing, because it's just like we're buggy, that we've evolved over billions of years. Evolution has made all kinds of trade-offs, and sometimes those trade-offs are bad for us individually. And so it's terrible when people die young of terrible genetic diseases. It's terrible when old people get dementia and lose their minds. I don't want that. If we can make little tweaks that we've figured out, I'd say, like, all power to us. Like, why not? That's the history of our species. We need to be careful. But for the first step on using this incredibly powerful technology on a human, it would have been more responsible if we had done it 5 years from now in a very responsible, very transparent way, addressing a target where there would have been a kid would have otherwise been born with a deadly genetic disease. And then we would have had, like in the beginning, you said, let's talk about the good stuff and then let's talk about the scary stuff. It's better to start with the good stuff because people are primed to be terrified. And so it just would have been so much better had we done it that way.